What would you do if you stumbled upon a life-or-death battle in your own neighborhood? When a massive python attacks Luna, a brave German Shepherd mother protecting her puppies, the tension rises with every second. Who will step up to help her? And what extraordinary events will unfold next? Jake wiped his brow as the cool summer breeze swept through the quiet suburban street. The rhythmic clatter of trash cans and the hum of his truck engine were the only sounds punctuating the stillness. It was the last stop on his route, and as usual, he relished these moments of solitude. The streetlights cast a warm, orange glow, highlighting the neatly trimmed lawns and the silent houses, their occupants likely winding down for the night. He lingered a moment longer, his gaze wandering to the large backyard of a familiar house. Luna lived there, a German Shepherd mother he'd grown fond of over the months. Jake often caught glimpses of her playing with her puppies in the yard during his early morning shifts. The thought of her pups made him smile. As he was about to step back into his truck, a sound pierced the night. It was faint at first, almost lost in the rustling of leaves, but unmistakable. A low, distressed whimper. Jake froze, straining his ears. The noise came again, louder this time, carrying with it an edge of pain and fear. It was coming from the direction of Luna's yard. Dropping his gloves, Jake moved quickly but cautiously toward the sound. His boots crunched against the gravel path, the faint noise amplified in the silence. As he approached the yard's edge, the whimpering grew sharper, more desperate. He hesitated for a moment before stepping into the shadows of the backyard. What he saw stopped him cold. Luna, her powerful body now rendered helpless, was wrapped in the thick, coiling body of a massive python. The snake's scales shimmered faintly under the dim glow of a nearby light, its powerful muscles constricting tighter with every breath the dog tried to take. Luna's eyes locked onto Jake's, wide with a mix of terror and plea. Jake's pulse quickened as he processed the scene. He had seen snakes before, small ones slithering through gardens or under trash bins, but nothing like this. This python was massive, its girth larger than his forearm, its length stretching further than he could see in the dim light. His instinct was to run forward and pull the snake away, but his feet stayed rooted. He knew enough to recognize the danger. A creature this size could kill not just Luna but a person too. He took a shaky breath, forcing himself to think. "Luna," he whispered, his voice trembling. She whimpered in response, a sound so filled with pain it tore at his chest. He scanned the yard, his eyes falling on a hose coiled near the fence. Maybe water could distract it? But before he could act, a movement in the shadows caught his eye. Near the corner of the yard, a cluster of small shapes huddled together. Luna's puppies. Jake's heart sank. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. His mind raced as he weighed his options, the sounds of Luna's distress filling the night air. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly powerless. Jake's mind raced as he stood frozen in Luna's backyard, the desperate cries of the German Shepherd pulling him from his daze. He couldn't let her suffer like this. His eyes darted between the massive python and Luna's litter of puppies huddled in the far corner. The puppies trembled, their small forms barely visible in the dim light. Every instinct in Jake screamed for him to act, but he had no idea how to face something so dangerous. He moved cautiously toward the garden hose lying near the fence. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. His fingers fumbled as he turned the nozzle, water sputtering before a steady stream flowed. Jake aimed the hose at the python, hoping the cold water might startle it enough to loosen its grip. The spray hit the snake's glistening scales, droplets reflecting the weak glow of the porch light. For a brief moment, the python shifted slightly, its coils slackening. "Come on," Jake muttered under his breath, his heart pounding. But just as he thought the plan might work, the python's body tensed. Its massive muscles coiled tighter around Luna, eliciting a sharp yelp of pain from her. Jake's chest tightened as he realized he might be making things worse. He dropped the hose and stepped back, his hands shaking. He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing emergency services with trembling fingers. The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling in the yard. "There's a dog," Jake stammered, glancing at Luna's weakening form. "A big snake. It's wrapped around her. I don't know what to do." The operator reassured him help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. Jake's eyes darted back to the puppies. They were barely old enough to walk, their tiny bodies pressed together for warmth and safety. One of them let out a soft whimper, and Jake felt a surge of urgency. If the python turned its attention to them, it would be a disaster. He grabbed a nearby broom, thinking he might be able to nudge the puppies closer to the safety of the house. But as he approached, Luna growled weakly, her maternal instinct overriding her pain. Even in her dire state, she was protecting them. Okay, Jake murmured, retreating a step. "I won't get too close." He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a hero, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance brought a flicker of hope. Jake glanced toward the street, willing the responders to arrive faster. He knew time was running out for Luna. Her breaths were labored now, her struggles growing weaker. Jake clenched his fists, frustration and helplessness washing over him. As he waited, he crouched down, locking eyes with Luna. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Help is coming. Just hold on." Her eyes flickered, a mix of fear and trust meeting his gaze. In that moment, Jake realized that saving her wasn't just about skill or strength. It was about not giving up, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The sound of Luna's strained breathing filled the quiet night as Jake anxiously scanned the yard for any sign of help. The sirens that had felt so close a moment ago seemed to stretch endlessly in the distance. He clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm. Luna's body trembled under the crushing force of the python's coils, and her eyes locked onto his again, pleading. A wave of helplessness washed over him, but he knew giving up wasn't an option. A door creaked open nearby, followed by hurried footsteps. Jake turned to see one of the neighbors, an elderly woman named Carol, rushing toward him with a flashlight in hand. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice shaking as she took in the horrifying scene. Jake quickly explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. Carol, a retired veterinarian, immediately assessed the situation with a calmness Jake envied. "We need to keep the snake distracted until help arrives," she said, her tone firm despite the fear flickering in her eyes. "Don't make any sudden moves. It's stressed, and that makes it unpredictable." More lights began flickering on in the surrounding houses, and soon, other neighbors joined them. Some stood frozen at the edge of the yard, whispering nervously among themselves, while a few, spurred by Carol's instructions, began gathering tools and supplies. One man handed Jake a sturdy rake, while another brought a long wooden pole. "We'll keep our distance," Carol instructed, "but we need to be ready if it tries to move toward the puppies." Jake glanced at the small cluster of puppies still huddled in the corner. One of them let out a soft whimper, and Luna growled weakly in response, her protective instincts refusing to fade despite her dire state. Jake felt a surge of determination. He had to do something more than just wait. Gripping the rake tightly, he positioned himself closer to Luna, ready to act if the python made any sudden moves. The python, sensing the growing commotion, adjusted its position slightly, its head lifting to survey the gathered humans. Its unblinking eyes gleamed in the flashlight beams, a cold and calculating stare that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. "Stay calm," Carol reminded everyone, her voice low and steady. "Don't provoke it." Just as the tension threatened to become unbearable, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, drawing closer by the second. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the group, though no one dared to lower their guard. The animal control vehicle pulled up to the curb, and two uniformed officers stepped out, their movements swift and purposeful. They carried specialized equipment, poles with loops, a large bag, and thick gloves designed for handling dangerous reptiles. The officers approached carefully, their calm professionalism reassuring everyone present. One of them spoke quietly to Carol, quickly gathering details about the situation. "We'll need to act fast," he said, glancing at Luna. "She's running out of time." Jake stepped back, his grip on the rake loosening as the officers took over. He felt a mix of relief and guilt, wishing he could have done more. Still, he stayed close, ready to assist if needed, his heart pounding as he watched the professionals begin their delicate work. The air was heavy with tension as the animal control officers moved into position. Every step they took was measured, their calm demeanor masking the urgency of the situation. One officer, a tall man with a steady gaze, held a pole with a loop at the end. His partner, a woman with quick reflexes and sharp focus, carried a long stick designed to guide the python's movements. Carol stood nearby, providing details about Luna's condition and urging the neighbors to stay back. Jake couldn't tear his eyes away from Luna, her breathing shallow, her body limp but still trembling under the python's grip. "Careful," the male officer murmured, his voice barely audible. "We need to loosen the coils gradually. If it feels threatened, could constrict further." His partner nodded, her movements precise as she edged closer to the snake's head. Jake held his breath, the rake still in his hands, unsure if he should stay ready or get out of the way. The python's head lifted slightly, its forked tongue flicking in and out as it sensed the disturbance. The officer with the loop pole moved slowly, positioning it just behind the snake's head. With a practiced motion, he slipped the loop over the python's neck and tightened it gently. The snake reacted instantly, its powerful body rippling as it tried to twist free. Luna whimpered, her eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. Jake took an involuntary step forward, his instincts screaming at him to help, but Carol placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Trust them," she whispered. "They know what they're doing." Her words didn't ease the tight knot in his chest, but he nodded, forcing himself to stay put. The female officer used her stick to nudge the python's body, carefully unwinding the first coil. It was a painstaking process, each movement deliberate and slow to avoid startling the snake. The neighbors watched in tense silence, some clutching each other for support. The puppies, sensing the danger, let out faint cries that seemed to echo in the still night. Jake glanced at them, his heart breaking at their fear, but his focus remained on Luna. As the second coil loosened, the python thrashed, nearly slipping free from the loophole. The officer tightened his grip, his muscles straining as he held the snake in place. "Almost there," he muttered, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His partner worked quickly, her hands steady as she unwound the final coil. Finally, with one last effort, the python was completely unwrapped from Luna. The male officer pulled it back, guiding its writhing body into the large bag his partner held open. The moment the snake was secured, a collective sigh of relief swept through the yard. Jake dropped the rake, his hands trembling, and rushed to Luna's side. She was still breathing, though barely. Her eyes fluttered open again, meeting Jake's for a fleeting moment. "She's alive," he said, his voice breaking. The officers nodded, already discussing their next steps for the python's relocation. Carol knelt beside Jake, gently checking Luna's injuries. Jake stroked her head softly, whispering, "You're safe now. It's over." The quiet hum of the animal clinic filled the room as Jake sat on a cold plastic chair, his hands still trembling from the night's events. Luna lay on a steel examination table, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The veterinarian worked carefully, cleaning the wounds left by the python's crushing grip. Jake watched every movement, his heart heavy with worry. Luna had survived, but the ordeal had left her weak, her body bearing the scars of a fight that nearly took her life. The puppies, now safe and nestled in a corner of the room, let out occasional whimpers, their tiny voices a reminder of what Luna had fought so hard to protect. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he glanced at the puppies. Despite the fear and exhaustion etched on his face, there was a spark of determination in his eyes. "She's a fighter," the vet said softly, breaking the silence. It's incredible she held on this long. Most dogs wouldn't have survived. Jake nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had seen the raw strength and determination in Luna's eyes, even as she faced what seemed like certain death. She wasn't just a fighter. She was a protector. Carol entered the room, carrying a tray of water and food for the puppies. She placed it down gently, her hands steady despite the long night. "They're going to be okay, too," she said, offering Jake a reassuring smile. "You did good, Jake. If you hadn't been there, none of this would have ended the way it did." He shook his head, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't do enough. If the team hadn't come in time, she wouldn't have made it." Carol crouched beside him, her voice firm yet kind. "You cared enough to act. That's what mattered. You saved her because you didn't give up, even when you were scared. That's more than most people would do." Her words hung in the air, a quiet truth that Jake wasn't ready to accept fully. The puppies began to move, their tiny paws pattering against the tiled floor as they ventured closer to Luna. One by one, they nestled against her side, their soft bodies providing warmth and comfort. Luna opened her eyes briefly, her gaze flickering toward her puppies before closing again. It was a small moment, but it filled the room with a sense of peace. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The weight of the night began to lift, replaced by a quiet resolve. He looked at Carol, his voice steady for the first time. "I want to do more, not just for Luna, but for others like her. I want to help." Carol smiled, her expression warm and encouraging. "Then you should. This isn't the end, Jake. It's just the beginning." As he watched over Luna and her puppies, Jake felt something shift inside him. He had come to the yard that night as an observer, someone on the outside looking in. Now, he felt a connection not just to Luna and her family, but to something greater. It wasn't just about saving one life, it was about making a difference, one act of courage at a time. The sun rose slowly over the suburban neighborhood, casting a warm glow across the tidy yards and quiet streets. Jake stood in the yard where it had all begun, his hands resting on the fence as he watched Luna move gingerly through the grass. Her steps were slower than before, her body still recovering from the injuries, but her tail wagged with quiet determination. The puppies darted around her, full of energy and oblivious to the danger they had narrowly escaped. Their soft yips and playful tumbles filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension of that harrowing night. Jake felt a strange mix of emotions as he watched them. Relief that they were safe, pride in what the community had accomplished, and a lingering sense of awe at Luna's resilience. Despite her scars, both physical and emotional, she had not once faltered in her role as a protector. He marveled at her strength, the quiet kind that didn't demand recognition but commanded respect. Carol appeared beside him, carrying a tray of water and treats for the dogs. "She's doing remarkably well," she said, setting the tray down near the fence. "Her wounds are healing faster than I expected. She's tougher than she looks." Jake smiled faintly, his gaze never leaving Luna. "She's more than tough. She's extraordinary." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching as one of the puppies climbed over Luna's paw, only to tumble down and try again. "You know," Carol began, her voice thoughtful, "what happened here brought out something special in everyone. You, the neighbors, even her. It's not just about survival, it's about connection. About what we do when we're called to act." Jake nodded, her words resonating deeply. He had spent so much of his life on the fringes, observing rather than participating. But that night had changed something in him. He had stepped into the fray, faced his fears, and found a part of himself he hadn't known was there. It wasn't about being a hero, it was about doing what needed to be done, even when it was hard. As the morning light grew brighter, more neighbors began to emerge from their homes. Some brought toys for the puppies, while others carried coffee and breakfast for Jake and Carol. The atmosphere was one of quiet celebration, a shared acknowledgement of what they had all overcome together. Children laughed as they played with the puppies, their joy contagious. Jake took a sip of the coffee handed to him by a kind-faced neighbor, his eyes scanning the scene. It wasn't just Luna who had been changed by the events of that night. The entire neighborhood seemed different, more connected, more alive. The fences that once symbolized separation now felt like boundaries to be crossed, not barriers to hide behind. As Luna lay down in the grass, her puppies snuggling against her side, Jake felt a deep sense of peace. He knew this wasn't the end of her story, or his. It was the beginning of something bigger. He had already taken the first steps by volunteering at the local animal shelter, driven by a newfound purpose. And now, standing here with his neighbors, he realized that small acts of courage, when shared, could ripple outward in ways he had never imagined. Looking at Luna and her puppies, Jake allowed himself to smile fully for the first time in what felt like years. "You did good, girl," he whispered under his breath. "We all did. Thank you so much for watching this story. We truly appreciate your time and support, and we hope it inspired or touched you in some way. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us reach more people who might enjoy stories like this. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. We're always bringing you heartfelt, impactful stories that celebrate courage, resilience, and connection. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more amazing stories with you. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you in the next adventure.